Bullying is a complex and ongoing issue in schools, and although policies exist to address it, how these policies are interpreted and applied in practice can vary significantly. In many cases, teachers are required to respond to bullying in real time, making decisions that are shaped not only by policy but also by context, experience, and available support. This project explores how primary school teachers in Ireland and China respond to bullying policies, focusing on their lived experiences rather than policy documents alone. By comparing these two contexts, the study also considers how cultural and institutional differences may influence teachers' responses. The video is divided into three parts: research design, researcher reflexivity, and data analysis. This study focuses on how teachers interpret and apply bullying policies in practice. While policies provide formal guidance, they do not always reflect the complexity of real-life situations in schools. Teachers often need to make immediate decisions based on significant context, student needs, and classroom dynamics. Therefore, this study aims to explore not only what policies say, but how teachers actually respond to bullying in their daily practice. This approach allows for a more realistic understanding of how policies function in educational settings. This study adopts a qualitative approach using focus groups. Qualitative research is particularly suitable for exploring experiences and perspectives, as it allows participants to express their views in their own words. Focus groups enable participants to interact with each other, which can lead to richer and more detailed data. For example, one teacher's experience of dealing with bullying may encourage others to reflect on their own practices, agree or even disagree. This interaction can generate insights that may not emerge in individual interviews. In addition, focus groups allow the researcher to observe how participants respond to each other, which can reveal shared understandings as well as differences. This is particularly important in cross-cultural research, where communication styles and levels of openness may vary between contexts, such as Ireland and China. However, focus groups also present challenges. Some participants may dominate discussions, while others may feel less confident to speak. This can influence the data collected, meaning that the researcher needs to carefully manage the discussion to ensure balanced participation. An alternative method is the use of surveys. Surveys allow researchers to collect data from a larger number of participants and make comparisons between groups. However, they often rely on structured questions, which may limit how teachers express their experiences. As a result, surveys may oversimplify complex issues, such as bullying, where responses are often shaped by context. In addition, participants may not always engage deeply with survey questions, which can affect the quality of the data. Another approach is policy analysis, which focuses on examining official documents. This can provide insight into how bullying is formally defined and addressed. However, there is often a gap between policy and practice, as teachers need to adopt policies to real situations. Therefore, policy analysis alone may not fully capture how bullying is actually managed in school. Overall, focus groups are the most suitable method for this study, as they allow for in-depth exploration of teachers' experiences and provide insight into how policies are applied in practice. Having considered the research design, it is also important to reflect on the role of the researcher in shaping the research process. In case study 2, AME conducts interviews with international students to explore their academic experiences. This example is particularly useful because it highlights how the researcher's background and position can influence the research process. In qualitative research, the researcher is not simply collecting data, but is actively involved in shaping how the data is produced and interpreted. This means that the researcher's perspective plays an important role in the research, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Can you tell me about your experience? Although researchers aim to be objective, their perspectives inevitably influence the research. This influence is not always obvious. For example, researchers may unconsciously pay more attention to responses that confirm their expectations, while overlooking those that challenge them. In Ahmed's case, he shares similar experiences with his participants, which may lead him to emphasize more with certain responses. On one hand, this can help build trust and encourage participants to speak more openly. On the other hand, it may also influence how the data is interpreted. To explain this further, bias in research is not always negative. In some situations, it can actually help researchers better understand participants. However, it becomes a problem when researchers are not aware of it. Therefore, recognizing and reflecting on this influence is a key part of qualitative research. It shows that the researcher is not completely neutral, but actively involved in shaping the research process. There are also important ethical considerations in this research context. Participants may not always feel comfortable expressing their true opinions, especially if they are concerned about how their responses may be perceived. For example, in Ahmed's study, students may worry about how their comments could affect their academic relationships or future opportunities. This reflects broader issues of power imbalance in research, where participants may feel constrained in what they can say. This also raises questions about how honest the data collected can be. If participants feel restricted, they may adjust their responses to what they believe is acceptable. For example, they may avoid criticizing institutions directly, even if they have concerns. In my own research, this issue is also relevant. Teachers may feel concerned about whether their responses align with school policies or expectations. They may worry about being judged or facing professional consequences. As a result, they may provide more cautious answers rather than fully expressing their experiences. This highlights the importance of creating a safe and supportive research environment. In addition, group dynamics can also influence the data collected. In focus group settings, some participants may dominate the discussion, while others may remain silent. For example, more confident individuals may speak more frequently, while others may hesitate to share their views. Participants may also agree with dominant voices even if they privately have different opinions. This can create a form of group consensus that may not fully represent individual perspectives. Therefore, the researcher needs to carefully manage the discussion to ensure balanced participation. Reflexivity involves recognizing how the researcher's background, assumptions, and interactions influence the research process. Rather than trying to remove this influence, reflexivity encourages researchers to acknowledge and reflect on it. From my perspective, this is particularly important in my own research. Being aware of my own assumptions helps me to approach the data more critically and avoid making conclusions too quickly. This makes the research more transparent and strengthens the credibility. This study uses thematic analysis to interpret qualitative data. Thematic analysis is widely used in qualitative research because it allows researchers to identify patterns and explore meaning within the data. It is particularly suitable for this study as the research focuses on teachers' experiences and perspectives. Another advantage of thematic analysis is its flexibility, as it can be applied across different research contexts. The process of thematic analysis involves several stages. First, the researcher becomes familiar with the data by reading it carefully multiple times. This helps to develop an overall understanding of participants' responses. Second, keywords or phrases are identified as codes. These codes represent important ideas within the data. Finally, these codes are grouped into broader themes that capture patterns across the data. It is important to note that this process is not always linear. Researchers may move back and forth between coding and developing themes as their understanding evolves. This makes thematic analysis a flexible but also interpretive process. For example, teachers may describe relying on their own judgment rather than strictly following policy. Phrases such as "in practice," "not clear," or "we just do what we think is best" can be identified as codes. These codes suggest that teachers are adapting policies to fit real situations. These codes can then be grouped into a broader theme, such as the gap between policy and practice. This theme indicates that policies may not always provide clear guidance and that teachers need to rely on their professional judgment. This is an important finding, as it highlights the challenges of implementing policies in real educational contexts. It also suggests that improving policies may require greater consideration of practical realities in schools. In addition, this example shows how qualitative data can provide deeper insights into teachers' experiences, rather than simply reporting what they say. Compared to content analysis, which focuses on categorizing or counting patterns in the data, thematic analysis allows for deeper interpretation. While content analysis can provide a clear overview, it may not capture the complexity of participants' experiences. Therefore, thematic analysis is more suitable for this study. Finally, it is important to consider how findings are presented in a critical way. In research, it is not enough to simply describe what participants say. Instead, researchers need to interpret the data and explain what it means. For example, rather than just stating that teachers rely on their own judgment, the analysis should explore why this happens and what it suggests about the effectiveness of policies. This allows the research to move beyond description and provide meaningful insights. By doing so, the study can contribute not only to academic knowledge, but also to improving practice in real educational settings. Based on the analysis, this study highlights several important points. One key finding is that there is often a gap between policy and practice. While policies provide general guidance, teachers still need to rely on their own judgment when dealing with real situations. This suggests that policies alone may not be sufficient to fully support teachers in practice. In addition, the study highlights the importance of considering teachers' perspectives. If policies are developed without taking into account real classroom experiences, they may be difficult to implement effectively. This shows that understanding practice is essential for improving policy. It is also important to recognize the limitations of this study. Firstly, the sample size is relatively small, which means that the findings may not be generalizable to all contexts. Secondly, participants may not always express their true opinions, especially in group discussions. This means that some perspectives may not be fully captured. In addition, the researcher's own perspective may influence how the data is interpreted. Although reflexivity helps to address this, it cannot completely remove subjectivity. Acknowledging these limitations helps to provide a more balanced and critical understanding of the research. In conclusion, this project has explored how teachers interpret and apply bullying policies in practice. By focusing on research design, researcher reflexivity, and data analysis, it highlights the complexity of educational research. More importantly, it shows that understanding real experiences is essential for improving both policy and practice. This process has also helped me to develop a more critical and reflective approach to research. Overall, the study demonstrates the value of qualitative research in exploring complex issues in education.